So Gloria, thank you very much for being on PRIMO NUTMEG. I do appreciate it.
Oh yes, thank you for having us on.
So you are running for President of the United States, and you are actually running on two different tickets, and maybe more than that. Maybe you want to correct me, but you are on the Party for Socialism and Liberation and the Peace and Freedom Party. Is that accurate?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, I also saw that you were the vice presidential nominee for the Workers' World Party in the past. Is that true as well?
Yeah, quite a few years ago. This year, I was nominated by the California Peace and Freedom Party, which is a ballot status party. I won the nomination at their convention. And across the state and the other states, I'm the nominee of Party for Socialism and Liberation, which we attained that ballot status by collecting signatures. And I'm nominated by the Vermont Liberty Union Party, which is the party that Bernie Sanders used to be in many years ago. And I got that nomination. They are a ballot status party.
Okay, so as sort of an outside observer, I guess maybe it's easy to get confused because there are so many different parties, and specifically there's so many different socialist parties. And something that Cindy Sheehan had informed me about that I didn't realize previously is that the Communist Party in the U.S. actually does exist and is a separate entity. However, it has endorsed the Democratic nominee for the past few decades. So could you explain just what the parties are that nominated you, why there are different parties, why there's not just one big socialist party in the United States?
Well, the socialist movement has evolved from different tendencies and thought which reflected somewhat international developments. Some were more aligned with China, others with the Soviet Union, but generally today there are not that many socialist parties left. I would say that there aren't that many socialist parties running in the elections who are on the ballots. Ours is our party, the Party for Socialism and Liberation, is on more states than any other socialist party. And I must say, in Florida, ourselves and other third parties were kicked off the ballot by a very unfair, what we consider unconstitutional move by the Secretary of State during the campaign, eliminating several parties from the ballot in Florida. But there are a number of different socialist parties. However, ours is the most active in the elections this year.
So could you explain what socialism really means in the 21st century? I mean, you think about 19th century socialism with Karl Marx and, some of the revolutions that happened like 1848. And you think of 20th century socialism, how that created the Soviet Union and China and different nation states across the world. Could you explain what the socialist parties in the 21st century stand for?
Well, the same that it was from the time of Marx and Lenin, but it became a reality with the Russian Revolution of 1917, the October Revolution. And since then, there have been other revolutions, whether it was Cuba, the Vietnamese, Yugoslavia, and several others. Of course, the socialist camp in Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union collapsed. They no longer exist. But in essence, socialism is a system whereby all the wealth that is produced by the working class, because all human labor creates the wealth in society, that it be owned in common and shared, instead of profits being, going into the pockets of the billionaires and millionaires. That profit would instead be used for the social good of society, for free health care, free education, to make sure there's housing for all, to have a proper infrastructure for civilian life, and for culture, for art, for all the things that make a life of dignity for everyone. And we believe that in the United States, in the richest country in the world, such tremendous productive capacity, and technology that there's no reason for anyone to be homeless, especially when there are millions more homes empty than there are homeless or underhoused people. There's no reason why everyone could not have quality universal health care for free, including preventive care, including mental care. The problem is that regardless of the Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, as it's properly known, that program is still based on guaranteeing profits, the maximization of profits for the healthcare industry. Instead, we say as socialists that all human needs, healthcare, education, culture, housing, everything people need should be an absolute guaranteed right. And it's possible if again, the wealth is shared by the people.
So this is a really interesting topic for me, and I really like to get into philosophy a bit if we have time. But I just want to ask, because we mentioned Bernie Sanders, we mentioned some things that are on the Democratic Party platform, and Bernie Sanders himself has endorsed Hillary Clinton for president of the United States. Why do socialists generally not just back the Democratic Party? And, as I mentioned earlier, the Communist Party actually does. The Communist Party endorses the Democratic nominee, at least for the past several decades. So why do your socialist parties not do the same? Why are you running as a third-party nominee?
Well, the Communist Party, as you said, has endorsed the Democrats since, I think, 1936. I would say that they're much more identified with the Democratic Party, and it would be very hard to identify them as communists, but although there are many, many members in their organization who are, great believers in socialism and great activists. We will not support the Democrats or the Republicans because we see them as the two parties of capital in the United States. They're the ones who run Congress. Actually, the lobbyists run Congress, and they're the ones who have voted for every war budget, every act of occupation of other countries in the world, and therefore we are an independent socialist party that not only is involved in elections. I think most of our activity is organizing in social movements, helping lead them, or being part of those that arise, whether it's Occupy or Black Lives Matter, the struggle against all police killings and brutality, the rights of tenants against landlordism and evictions, anything that improves the lives of the people we're involved in. And that's true with, many socialists. But I would say that in this year, 2016, it is the most opportune time for a socialist party like ours to be in the election despite nary a chance of winning or getting anywhere close. We're not on that many state ballots. But to reach to the people, to talk to the millions who are suffering great insecurity, poverty, unemployment, and many people who we've met who are homeless, to gather up the forces in the coming weeks, months, and years, because that's what it's going to take to change society radically. Right now we're seeing the banks controlling most of the wealth, the industries and wealth in this country. They make the decisions, the dictatorial decisions that decide whether someone has a house or not, whether someone's evicted or not, whether a factory shuts down and goes abroad. All these kind of things are because of the power of capital, and the two parties, Democrat and Republican, back that system. They make sure that it continues to get richer while the poor get poor. And ultimately, the President of the United States is the CEO of the capitalist system. It's why, despite the promises made by Obama and previous presidents, very little changed except to increase the power of capitalism. We saw under Obama's term, overall, more deportations, more troops abroad, more surveillance of the people, total surveillance by the NSA, FBI, CIA, as well as the growing power of banks and corporations. despite the Affordable Care Act, now we see that because the profit motive was retained, the health insurance companies are jacking up prices and promise to do even more so. So what was originally important measures in that plan, when you keep the profit motive inside of any health care plan, it's bound to fail. It's bound to fail for the people who need the health care.
So you mentioned banks controlling our economy, and I think that the most acute example of that is the Federal Reserve System. What are socialist or your socialist party or your personal views on the Federal Reserve, and how should money exist? You know, money traditionally was gold and silver, and then we have a central banking system now where it's really governed by credit. Do you think that that's the right path? Do you think that there should be a central bank? What is your view on, what is your monetary policy?
We think that all the banks should be nationalized, and certainly they can be centralized, but primarily nationalized for all the assets of the banks, which have been really attained by theft of the people, the working class, should be used to invest in human needs. For example, as I said, literally hundreds of billions of dollars in infrastructure that are needed, whether it's the roads, highways, mass transportation that's still needed, water systems, utilities, everything that is in great decay, because that is not how the corporations really make profits, or they're provided mostly by government, and the government has very little revenue because of the tax codes and tax system that really benefits corporations, banks, the rich. The Federal Reserve is used a lot by people. For example, in the Occupy movement, they focused on that issue of the Federal Reserve System, but in essence, it's really all the banks that are needed to be taken over, and the assets, the wealth of the banks be used for the common good. For example, it's not just the wealth themselves, but the practice of foreclosing on people's homes, the idea of their enormous criminal speculation of the last decade, which led to the financial crisis in 2007, 2008, practices which still continue and are bound to lead to another financial drop in the economy. This time, we cannot pay for it. It's an outrage that we're still paying for the last tax bailout, and we say instead of this banking system as it exists now, let students be bailed out, the $1.3 trillion debt of students, a phenomenal number, and let them go to school for free. I mean, it's unimaginable how much could be attained in society if the people have the power. After all, when you think about it, look at Gap, for example, that makes all the clothing abroad, paying people pennies in Central America and other countries. You can just look at your clothes and look at all the labels from countries around the world on every continent paying slave wages. And yet those executives who make tens of millions of dollars, they don't work that hard. They hardly work at all. It's the workers who make the wealth, and you can talk about any industry, real estate, hospitals, healthcare, education, universities. They're all profit-driven, and that's why when the capitalists are in control, they find every way they can to enrich themselves and their corporations, their entities, their institutions. They will never have enough. Right now, the tax debate going on between Clinton and Trump in the debates, very little they were said, although Trump did say he wanted to continue the Reaganite kind of tax cuts for the rich. But Hillary Clinton would follow the same policy, and it just means, again, that there'll be far less revenue for the government, for the programs that people need, coming from corporations, and the burden will fall on the working class.
So we brought up the Soviet Union earlier, and of course, as many people know, the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, and Putin is now the president of Russia. And something that's really remarkable about this election, I think, is the hawkishness that the Democratic Party is now taking against Russia. You see that with statements that Hillary Clinton has made about what's really at stake in Syria is Russian aggression, and that we need a no-fly zone and should be prepared to shoot down Russian planes. You also have, some of the rhetoric surrounding the Ukraine. I'm wondering what the socialist parties, or again, your personal perspective is on Russia. Do you see Putin as just another capitalist and this sort of infighting among capitalists, or how do you view what's going on right now and this restart of the Cold War, essentially?
Well, once again, Putin is being used like every other leader whose country has become a target, whether it was Milosevic or Saddam Hussein, Ahmadinejad. We could go down the list, Fidel Castro. Every leader that the U.S. has decided to attack their country has been demonized as an individual to justify aggression against those countries. The U.S. government, which we consider imperialist, is involved in a very dangerous move against Russia. It's not just what Hillary Clinton is saying. She's just the most enthusiastic advocate and, as you said, war hawk for the Pentagon. The Pentagon has already, during the Obama administration and even before, since the collapse of the Soviet Union, been moving to take over influence and actual occupation of former Soviet republics. It is a threat to Russia itself. The U.S. would never accept U.S. troops, foreign troops coming into Mexico or into Canada, really gearing up their military against the United States. The U.S. would never accept that, and Russia shouldn't either. We do not consider Russia a threat. And in fact, Russia has played a role in Syria of defending a country that has asked for its help against terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra. All these formations have arisen since the U.S. invasion and occupation of Iraq. I want to go further beyond just the Russian situation, but to look at the Middle East and Russia and that whole region, and how the U.S. aggression since the invasion of Iraq in 2003 has led to destruction of states like Libya, attempted destruction of Syria, and Hillary Clinton is promising to declare a no-fly zone. Maybe it'll happen under Obama, who knows. Maybe it'll happen between election time and inauguration so that she inherits something that she very much wants to continue, a war against Syria. But Russia has its own ideas. They are defending Syria because I think they see that if Syria were to be overthrown and the terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, ISIS were to gain more power, it would eventually endanger Russia as well. And I see the U.S. wanting to break up Russia. You see that already. They're fomenting of opposition groups in areas of Russia like Dagestan or Chechnya and other places. It's a long, complicated issue, but essentially we see the U.S. military role as being one of purely of aggression and not bringing peace or any stability to the world. In fact, it's helping to destabilize the world.
So I know that we're kind of running over. I did just want to ask one brief last question because, looking into politics over the years, I've realized that there's not just a spectrum between right and left. There's also a spectrum between centralization and decentralization. And it seems like different socialist parties, and it seems like what you're saying is calling for more centralization. So I'm just wondering, not only is there a libertarian capitalist party in the United States, but there are also libertarian socialists, and you see that with, a lot of different protest groups, and I'd say even the Green Party to a certain extent, they call for decentralization, and, some of the rhetoric coming from Noam Chomsky. Kevin Carson as well, if you ever heard of him, or the Center for a Stateless Society. So I'm just wondering what your perspective is on libertarian socialists who call for communal ownership, but doing that through decentralized, local, or even non-state methods.
Well, I'm not real clear about the term libertarian socialist. I think it's kind of a contradiction. But I think those who are calling for what you were saying, decentralization, I think they're calling for the decentralization of the conglomerates and monopolies being down to local control and so on under the capitalist system. And I do not believe that breaking up the monopolies is possible under capitalism. I think it requires a radical reformation, really a socialist revolution, an overturning of the system itself, and putting it in the hands of the people. Now, there's certainly a reason to decentralize, for example, the agribusiness. I think we're finding in the last years for the environmental protection of the planet and people's health that it's far better to go back to the ways of agriculture that's not just monoculture, massive planting of corn and soybeans, and creating, for example, fertilizer from, nitrogen fertilizer from oil products. The oil industry has addicted much of production in the United States and the world to oil. And so there's certainly a case for decentralizing many parts of production, but I don't think that capitalism can just be reduced to breaking up the monopolies. Look what happened at AT&T. They broke them up, and now they're remonopolizing again. That's capitalism. You cannot reform capitalism sufficiently to deal with all the problems that people have. We believe in state socialism, where there is a state that protects the interests of the people and prevents capitalism from coming back. I think otherwise it's a very idealistic view of how to change the world without it really ever taking place.
Well, Gloria la Riva, you are the nominee for the Party for Socialism and Liberation and also the Peace and Freedom Party. Just between now and Election Day, where can folks learn more about you and these parties and your platform?
Yes, they can look us up at Gloria la Riva for President.com, and 4 is a number. But also they can look up at the website of our coverage on many, many issues and how to get involved beyond the elections. Like I said, our main work is outside of the elections, because that's where the real change comes, when people mobilize, organize, fight back, and defend and expand their rights. It's the activism that has made societal changes for the better. So they can contact us also at info@pslweb.org. PSL standing for Party for Socialism and Liberation. Again, info@pslweb.org. And thank you for your time, Steve.